directory. All right, it's going to be somewhat similar. You're just used to setting up a forest, a domain forest. What we'll be defining is what we call a suffix base, which will be kind of synonymous with your forest, okay? As a domain, all right? We're going to be looking at different object types, what we call containers and leafs, okay? The main difference between a container and a leaf is a container can hold other containers and leafs. A leaf can't hold anything, okay? So an example of a leaf would be like a user object, all right, in Active Directory, or LDAP. And a container would be like an OU, or organizational unit, where you can have sub-OUs or leafs, okay? Groups, so on and so forth, all right? So LDAP itself is simply a protocol for accessing or modifying a directory structure, okay? So LDAP on its own isn't what defines the directory, okay? What we'll be doing is setting up OpenLDAP to run as a database, so what we call BDB, or Berkeley database. We'll see that as we go along. So the directory structure actually gets stored in this database, right? So LDAP, as we're going along, we'll be using what we call LDIF files, or LDAP data interchange format files, to actually add or modify objects in the directory tree, okay? Or DIT, directory information tree, okay? And that's why I drew this out, okay? It is literally kind of a tree that we're building here, okay? And this is important because when we get to the LDIF and we're kind of building out our directory structure for OpenLDAP, right? There's logical steps that we need to do, right? So you need to do it in steps. So this would be like step 1, this would be step 2, then this would be step 3, okay? What a lot of people run into is they try to jump to step 3 without doing the rest of the steps, right? So they try to add their leaf objects, but we have no tree to add the leaf objects to yet, okay? So with OpenLDAP, it's a little different. Well, not really different, okay? In Active Directory, you're doing this all in a GUI, right? You have to define your forest first, then you can define your OUs and put your users inside those OUs, right? If we don't have any forest, then we can't put any OUs in a forest, right? So similar here, right? The big difference is because this is Linux, it's all text-based. We don't have any nice UI to see what this looks like, right? At least in Active Directory, you have the hierarchical structure in a user interface, and it's a little easier to concept. This is all text files, so it's harder. Where I can, I'll kind of go back and forth to hopefully make things easier, okay? Because you have seen this in Active Directory, it just looks a little different, okay? You can use LDAP to access Active Directory, or Active Directory's directory, okay? So it's very similar. The main difference is obviously Linux versus Windows, okay? So what I'll do is I'll get started on the lab. I'm going to run through it with you guys. It is kind of a long lab, and it's long because of all these LDIF files that we need to create ourselves, okay? To add objects or modify objects. At the end of the lab, we'll use LDAP to resolve fully qualified domain names into IP addresses as well, okay? So we'll see that you can do this with LDAP as well as DNS. All right. So your objectives here are going to be able to install and configure OpenLDAP server and client, okay? There's going to be client-side utilities as well as server-side config, okay? So section A, we're first going to install everything. So you need to install OpenLDAP. OpenLDAP-servers will be installed on your server, and then OpenLDAP-clients on your server and client, okay? Okay, it's just going to give us access to our client utilities such as LDAP add, LDAP search, LDAP modify, so on and so forth, okay? So some of the things you guys need to remember when we're talking about starting or stopping the service name itself is called slapd, not OpenLDAP, okay? So it's systemctl start, stop, restart, slapd, okay? Slap test is going to be a syntax checker, okay? So kind of similar to, if you recall back to Apache CTL, all right? It will check your syntax to make sure it's good before you start the service. This does the same thing, okay? So we're going to get right into it, okay, with the initial setup. It's going to talk about creating a file called slapd.conf, okay? This is actually a legacy way of doing OpenLDAP, okay? The new way uses a directory structure, so etc OpenLDAP slapd.d and ldiff files, okay, to define your OpenLDAP directory. But what we're gonna do is rename the slapd.d directory so that it gets missed, okay? So by default, OpenLDAP is gonna look for that. If it sees it, it will use it. So we're gonna rename it to something else. It doesn't matter what it is as long as it's not slapd.d. All right, so when it looks for it, it won't find it and it will fall back to the legacy configuration of slapd.conf, okay? And we're gonna define our own configuration file, all right? It does tell you to ensure permissions on the file are set so they're not world readable, and we're gonna change the group ownership to LDAP, okay? So we will take a look at that, all right? So I'm gonna clear, I'm going to cd.ls. All right, print working directory. I'm in etc OpenLDAP already. I already have my slapd.conf file because of my previous lab, okay? And I did rename the slapd directory to slapd.d.old, okay? So it's simply just a mv slapd.d to whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter as long as it's not slapd.d. All right, what I'll do is remove slapd.conf and build this with you guys, okay? So vi slapd.conf, and we're gonna run through these server configuration that's in your lab document, okay? We need to add some schema files. Once I'm done configuring this file, I'll show you where those schema files are, okay? So I'm just gonna include the ones that it asks us for: core, cosine, init.org, person, and NIS, okay? So etc OpenLDAP, sorry, schema, and then I'll just grab this so it's a quick copy paste as we go along. Okay, and then I'm gonna say core.schema, right? Cosine.schema. We're gonna say init.org person .schema, and we're gonna say nis.schema. Okay, we're gonna define the process ID file. It's gonna be var run OpenLDAP and then slapd.pid. Our log level will be 256, which is synonymous with informational, all right? If you check the OpenLDAP website or documents, it'll tell you what the different log levels are if you want to set it to something else. All right, and this just gives you some background information. So by default, OpenLDAP logs to syslog facility local 4. So it's saying, hey, if you want to break up your LDAP logs from the rest of the system logs, set up your system logger to log local 4 to a different file, varlog LDAP or something, okay? So this is it for the global, what we call the global configuration portion of slapd, okay? The next portion is going to be the database definition, okay? So we're going to be using something called Berkeley Database, or BDB. All right, just defines the database structure for OpenLDAP, or the directory structure. We're going to give it what the search base is, or the suffix, search suffix. This would be synonymous with your forest and Active Directory, okay? So we're defining example 167 and then DC equals lab, okay? It is always a comma delimited with no spaces, okay? So just remember that. It is space sensitive. We're going to define the directory that our database is going to be stored, okay? So var lib LDAP, and I'm going to say example 167.lab, okay? So var lib LDAP exists. This subdirectory example 167.lab you guys will have to create, okay? And then again, it's asking us to set specific permissions, okay? User and group to LDAP, and then permissions 700, all right? All right, so next we're gonna define the root distinguished name, or what is the admin account or an account that has the ability to modify, add, or remove objects from our directory, okay? So we're gonna say LDAP ADM, or admin, DC equals example 167, DC equals lab, okay? Our root password we're going to define plain text, all right, for our lab. This talks about that, okay? So LDAP admin's password is set with the root pass or PW directive. You can create an encrypted password using the slap passwd utility, okay? Typically, if you're using this in production, obviously you don't want plain text passwords, okay? And that's where that slap passwd utility would come in. Because this is a lab, it doesn't really matter, okay? So we'll just set it to secret. All right, we'll save that file, right quit, all right? ls-al. One thing I need to do is set the permissions as the lab said, right? So we're gonna have to change the owner to ldap slapd.conf ls-al. All right, so we have the group ownership set. All right, and then we need to chmod 640, okay, so that it's not world readable, slapd.conf ls-al. And now the permissions are set correctly according to the lab, okay? So we can use this slap test-u utility to test our config file. So if it says testing succeeded, we're good. If it throws an error, it should tell you what is wrong in your configuration, okay? Then you would go back and fix that, okay? One thing we need to do now is set up our database, okay? So I'm just going to take a look at my slapd.conf file, and I define it in varlib ldap example 167. So I'm just going to cd varlib ldap ls, and I already have mine from my previous lab, okay? So ldap, if I ls-al that file, you'll see that I have my database there already from a previous lab, okay? So what I'm going to do is remove that so that I'm with you guys. So remove recursively example 167.lab. All right, now it's gone. So I'm going to make that directory example 167.lab. And we're saying copy the database configuration file db_config.example that comes with the RPM package open LDAP servers, okay? Under your lab content, I have that file for you guys, and right at the top, I give you the absolute path of where that exists so that you can copy it, okay? So I believe it's under USR local. Does it share? Open LDAP. Open LDAP servers, okay? So USR share open LDAP servers and then db_config.example. So we're just going to copy that. To our current path. And we're just going to call it db_config, okay? So if I ls that, I should have my config file, okay? And I'm going to go set the configure or the permissions to be what it asks us to. So right here, it has to be owned by user and group LDAP with permissions, okay? So I'm going to chon recursively. I'm going to say LDAP, an example 167.lab, okay? Same thing with chmod. We're going to recursively set that to 700. All right, so everything is set now, okay? ls-al, ls-al example. All right, so our permissions are good. LDAP, we have it 700, okay? So slap test -u, I should be able to, at this point, restart slapd. ls-al example 167, and now I have my database files being rebuilt, okay? So database looks good. Database config, db_config is simply optimization parameters for your database, okay? So we don't need to worry about modifying it in this lab, but if you had like a production open LDAP directory server, right? You may want to optimize it, okay? So things like caching, how much RAM it uses, so on and so forth, okay? So this is just some background if you want to do database troubleshooting. So if something breaks and you need to do troubleshooting, this is going to give you some hints, okay? Or you can just remove those files and directories like I did and restart Slapd and it'll recreate them all from scratch for you. But it does mean that you're losing your whole directory structure, okay? So LDAP client configuration, okay? On the client system, we're going to install OpenLDAP and OpenLDAP-clients, okay? So yum install OpenLDAP-clients. All right, mine's already installed. Server, it's going to be similar, okay? Prior to this, sorry, I should have gone over that. So it's going to be yum install OpenLDAP-servers, and then OpenLDAP-clients. Okay, -y. Okay, it's all done, okay? All right, so this is saying the ldap.conf file is going to be the client-side configuration file, and we need to set the URI and base directives, okay? So I'm going to do that now. So cd etc openldap, okay? And the ldap.conf file, we're going to set the base to dc equals example magic number, comma, dc equals lab. Mine's set. And then the URI, because we're on the server, we're going to say LDAP is localhost, and the LDAP is in our red interface 172.16.30.167. Okay. On the client side, it'll just be the red interface for your server. Okay. So on the client, I'm going to do the same thing, vi ldap.conf. And I have my base set already, and then the URI is simply the red interface of my server, right? Okay. And so now the LDAP client config is done. So we've set it up on both sides. We can save those files. All right. And then for LDAP testing, it's just going to go through the client utility options. You guys can read that. We'll talk about that as we get to it. All right. So we're going to create some objects using LDIF, okay? So what I'm going to do first before we get there is just simply a LDAP search -x. So I'm going to take a look at my current directory structure. And what I see here is result no such object, okay? So I'm saying, hey, I'm looking for the search base example167.lab. And it's saying there's no such object. And that's simply because when I deleted my database, it's fresh, right? We haven't built anything yet, right? So we haven't actually built this tree that's behind me, okay? That's what we're going to be doing next with our LDIF files, okay? Again, it has to follow the logical steps of step 1, 2, and 3. So we got to build that trunk out. Then we'll build our branches. Then we'll build our leaves, okay? So we can't start at the leaves and work our way backwards, because you'll get something like, yeah, this object doesn't exist that you're adding me to, right? Because you haven't defined it yet. So it is a logical process where we need to go through the proper steps, okay? So again, that's why it's defined as it is, okay? We need to add the base object first, then our container objects, organizational units, okay? Then some user accounts, all right? You could do the group account before the user accounts if you wanted. But the logical steps have to at least be the base in place first, and then our organizational units that our leafs are going to be put into, okay? So we can't do this backwards. You can't do the groups and the users before you've defined the base or the OUs, okay? It won't work. So we're gonna add the base suffix first, then we're gonna add our OUs, then we're gonna add our users, then we're gonna add our groups, okay? So I already have these LDIFs, so I'm just going to cd into LDIFs. And what I'll do is I was manually going through these for everybody. What I might do is just show you the files and then execute them so that you guys can get to the lab a little faster, because it is a long one. So capbase.ldif. So we're defining the distinguished name for our suffix. We always have to give a distinguished name in our LDIF format, okay? That's what tells our directory what object we're going to be creating or modifying, okay? So distinguished name is important. our object classes are important, and then what we're defining, okay? So here we're giving the distinguished name of the base suffix. We're saying the object class is top and it's a domain. We're saying that the DC is example 167, and then a description, which is simply similar to a comment, right? So you don't need to give it a description, all right? It's just a comment, all right? So we're gonna add the base LDIF file using our LDAP add utility, okay? So we're just gonna scroll down to LDAP add, right? This is the syntax for it. So I'm gonna use LDAP add. We're gonna give it simple dash lowercase x is simple authentication. Dash capital D is the root DN. Okay, so canonical name is LDAP ADM. DC equals example 167. DC equals lab. And we're going to say the password is secret. Sorry, W is secret. And then the file that we want to use is base.ldif. Okay. All right. So we got this adding new entry, DC equals example 167, DC equals lab. So if I LDAP search now, -x, we should get a success back, all right? So we do have a result. We're saying that there's 0 results, but it is successful, okay? So the reason it's 0 is because all we have right now is the base suffix, okay? So it's saying, yep, there's the base suffix, it is here, but there's nothing here yet, okay? So as we start adding our OUs and users, we're gonna get more results in this output as we go along, okay? So number of responses 2, number of entries is 1, okay? So again, we're gonna add the OUs, so cat OU.ldif. I'm again defining the distinguished name, OU equals accounts. And that's going to be in the suffix DC equals example 167, DC equals lab or domain. Object class is going to be top and organizational unit, okay? And then OU accounts, all right? Similar to groups, all right? Giving it the object class, what the OU name is going to be, and the full distinguished name for where it's going to be, all right? So again, we're going to use that LDAP add command, and we're just going to give it the LDIF file, so OU.ldif. Now I have these 2 OUs that have been added, so I should be able to LDAP search -x, okay? And now we have more entries, all right? And so accounts, groups, and our base suffix, all right? So that's good. So what we want to define now is some users, okay, or groups. We can start with groups actually, so I'll flip this on you guys. So cat groups, okay? And what we're doing again is giving it the distinguished name. It has to be in the OU groups, which we already have, right? So in other words, if we didn't have this OU, we would have to create another LDIF file to add that OU groups, okay? So distinguished name is going to be canonical name users, OU groups, domain example 167.lab. Object class is going to be POSIX group. Canonical name users, GID number is going to be 1000, and then the member UID of the users that we're going to configure, okay? This is all in your lab document. I'm not just pulling it out of nowhere, okay? It's literally that. I'm just changing the member UID to the users that we asked you to create above, okay? So I'm going to add that groups.ldif, okay? And we've added the entry for that. So again, you can go back and do an LDAP search, and we should see that the groups exist there, okay? So now I'm going to add my users. So I'll cat this output for you guys. All right. So I have 3 users now, okay? Lin user 1, 2, and 3, which we're asking you to do up above, okay? So this gives you kind of the background of it, all right? It's going to talk about what classes, all right? It is going to talk about 2 different types of classes, what we call an auxiliary class and what we call a structural class, okay? The best way to think about this is a structural class is required and it defines an object type, and an auxiliary class gives us more attributes for an object but it can't exist on its own, okay? So think of an auxiliary class as kind of a subclass of a structural class that gives us more attributes for a specific object, okay? So when we're creating our users, the structural class is going to be init.org person, and the auxiliary class is going to be POSIX account. And if you guys read through here, it's going to tell you the required attributes for each one and the optional attributes, okay? So init.org person required is canonical name, surname. POSIX account expands that to canonical name, UID number, group ID number, home directory. Optional attributes will be user password, login shell, description, gecko, so on and so forth, okay? So again, POSIX account is just expanding on that object and just defining more attributes that are available for it, okay? And it'll be specific to Linux, right? So this could be used for a Linux user, okay? Where we're defining the home directory, the user ID number, and the group ID number, okay? So again, it gives you the format to do this. So distinguished name, you're going to define the distinguished name. Object classes, okay? So structural, then auxiliary. Canonical name, surname, UID or user ID number, group ID number, home directory, login shell, mail, and then user password, okay? So if you see, I did that, all right, for my 3 users, okay? I left out mail for one of them, but you can see that they're all defined here, okay? So what I'm gonna do is add that file. So I'm gonna create those users now. All right, and I get adding new entry, UID, lin user 1, OU accounts, lin user 2, OU accounts, lin user 3, OU accounts, okay? So again, LDAP search -X. Now our tree structure is getting a little bigger, right? So we still have our search base, our OUs, we have a group, but now we also have 3 users, okay? So we have some accounts as well, user objects, all right? So from here, what we're going to talk about is modifying existing objects, okay? So I have these users now, so what we're going to talk about is modifying some of their attributes. Okay, it talks about this, okay? So there's a couple different ways. We have a client utility LDAP modify. You have LDAP add, LDAP delete, okay? We talked about LDAP add. LDAP delete is simply if I wanted to remove something, or, you know, if there's a specific branch, maybe I want to remove OU hosts and everything under that, you can do that with the LDAP delete, okay? So we can recursively remove anything under that as well. But for the most part, LDAP modify is what we're going to be using for modifying object attributes, okay? So we can add attributes, okay, to an existing object. We can modify attributes of an existing attribute, okay? But if we use this change type modify, this is saying we also need to define what type of change type, okay? So change type modify is typically the one we're going to use. And then we can also say, hey, we're going to add, delete, or replace to perform and on which attribute, okay? So what we'll do is this is one that I will do along with you guys. I'm going to do it on my server side, okay? And what I'm going to do is just remove this modify.ldif, okay? Yes. And I'm going to create this with you, modify.ldif. And what I'm going to do is modify one of my users. So I'm going to, again, we have to give it the distinguished name, right? UID equals lin user 1, OU equals accounts, DC equals example 167, and then DC equals lab. And what I'm going to say, here's change type modify. And then what I want to do, okay? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a mail attribute to lin user 1. And I'm going to set that mail attribute to lin user 1 at example 167.lab, okay? So again, distinguish name, what change type I want, modify. But if we, as it says in the lab, if we use change type modify, we also need to indicate what type of change, which is the add mail. and then we're defining what that new attribute's going to be, okay? So again, right quit, and I can do this LDAP search -x, and we're going to say UID equals lin user 1, all right? So I can specify just the specific user, and what I'm going to do is search for the male attribute, and I get nothing back, right? There's nothing there, okay? So what we're going to do is use that LDAP modify command to modify the male attribute now. So LDAP modify -x -d, canonical name is LDAP ADM, TC equals example 167, TC equals lab, okay? Secret -f modify.ldif. All right, so it says modifying entry for lin user 1, OU accounts, DC example 167.lab. And now we'll search for the male attribute for lin user 1. And we have the male attribute there that wasn't there before, okay? So we've added an attribute to an existing object, okay? What we can also do is modify that attribute, okay? So we don't just need to, we can also replace, attributes of objects, okay? So what we'll do is modify login. So I'm gonna remove that, modify login. Yes. And what I'm gonna add is, actually I just vi replace.ldif. And I'll say, hey, I'm gonna say that the distinguished name here is UID equals lin user 1 again, OU equals accounts. And then we're going to say DC equals example 167, and then DC equals lab. And we're going to say change type is modify. And then what we're going to say is replace the male attribute. And we're going to say that the new male attribute is new male at example 167.lab, okay? So now the logic here is that we're going to replace the male attribute with this new attribute configuration, okay? So I'm going to save that. So if we recall, the male is lin user 1 at example 167.lab. So I'm going to execute LDAP modify and then replace .ldif, okay? Modified an entry, and then just use that LDAP search command again. And we see that the male attribute's updated to what we've asked it to, okay? So we can modify existing attributes of objects. We can add new attributes to existing objects. And again, you can do the same with delete, okay? So we could do the same, exact same logic. So delete.ldif. And what I'll do is say distinguished name is UID equals lin user 1, OU equals accounts, example 167, and then DC equals lab. We're going to say change type is a modify. We're going to say delete male, okay? So we're going to delete the male attribute, okay? And we're going to execute again, but it's going to be delete.ldif. I see what I did. I missed the DC portion here. Okay. All right, so modifying entry for lin user 1. And we're just gonna LDAP search again. And now I have no male attribute, okay? So we've taken a look at adding to an existing object, replacing an attribute of an existing object, then removing an attribute of an existing object, okay? And if we look, everything else is unchanged. It was just that one male attribute that we were editing, okay? All right, so that's modifying your users. It is going to ask you to add specific attributes and then delete them, okay? So we just went through all that. All right, so now the last portion of the lab is going to be setting up an LDAP server as a network configuration information provider. In other words, we're going to create some computer objects, and we're going to be able to resolve fully qualified domain names, all right, using LDAP instead of DNS, okay? So what we'll do is we will create those files. So host.ou, all right? So we it asks you to create a OU called hosts. I'm going to do that here. Okay. Quick and easy. We'll just add that, and then we'll create the hosts together. Okay. So I've created that OU called hosts, and I will create this hosts.ldiff with you guys. Okay. bi hosts.ldiff. Again, we have to always give a distinguished name, okay? And it's going to be CN for canonical name, all right? Equals happy, OU equals hosts, example, sorry, DC equals example 167, DC equals lab, okay? And then we're talking about specific object types or object classes, okay? So again, IP host is an auxiliary object class. We need to add a structural object class, okay? So in other words, an auxiliary object class can't exist on its own. We have to define a structural object class to use an auxiliary object class, because as I said, if you think about it, it's like a sub-object class of a structural, okay? So we're going to define those object classes. Object class is going to be device, and then object class is going to be IP host, okay? And now we can define these attributes, okay? So IP host number is going to be 172.16.32.167. Canonical name, I'll give it the fully qualified domain name, happy.example167.lab, and I will give it a description. This is the happy server, okay? So I'm going to do the same thing for Peachy. I'm just going to copy paste this to make my life easier. And just modify the distinguished name to Peachy. The IP address is fictional, .33. And then we're changing the canonical name to Peachy.example167. This is the Peachy server, okay? All right. So we have that hosts.ldiff file, okay, defining two hosts, okay. .ldiff. All right. So two guys with the distinguished name, object classes, IP host number, canonical name, descriptions, okay. So we're gonna add them. Hosts.ldiff, and we've added the entry for Happy and Peachy, okay. So there's a second portion to this on the client side. All right, we need to install a new package, nss-pam-ldapd is what allows us to use LDAP directory service to be prime source of name service information. In other words, allows us to actually resolve or fully qualified domain names to IP addresses. The config file is etc/nslcd.conf and the service name is nslcd as well, okay? So systemctl start, stop, enable nslcd. So I'm going to go to my client side, and I already have it installed, but I'll run through it. Yum install nss-pam-ldapd. Okay, so it's already installed. And then you're going to edit that configuration, etc/nslcd.conf /, it's going to be URI. So we need to define the URI, which I have here. URI is LDAP 172.16.30.167. And then we also need the base, the search base, which I've defined base space DC equals example 167, comma DC equals lab, okay? So right quit, systemctl restart, nslcd, okay? As long as it's running, status, nslcd. All right, we should have the ability to resolve host names now, okay? So the last portion of this is editing our etc/nsswitch.conf file to also add LDAP to the hosts directive, okay? So that the LDAP directory can be used to query, all right? So we're gonna vi etc/nsswitch.conf, and we're gonna look for the line hosts, all right? And I already have LDAP. You guys won't have it. You'll have to edit this and add it, okay, as the last entry. right? And we can save that file, okay? At this point, you should be able to use these tests, okay? So get ent hosts, all right? And we see that I have Happy and Peachy. And if I cat etc hosts, so check my hosts file, they don't exist, okay? So I'm getting these from some other source, okay? I know that they're not locally defined in my hosts file, all right? So what I'm gonna do is ping happy.example167.lab, all right? And we have it resolving to an IP address, okay? Same thing for Peachy. The difference here is that Peachy doesn't exist as an IP anywhere, so even though it's resolving, I can't hit it, that's fine, okay? I can also use just the host name because of the way I defined my hosts, okay? So ping Peachy, and Peachy will also resolve, and then same for Happy, okay? All right, so that's the last portion of your lab. All right, so it's all done. Honestly, the bulk of the lab is just creating those LDIF files and running through and adding them, building out your directory structure, okay? It's just tedious.